All right, so we got the car back into the garage here. We've got it up onto the jack stands, and we are going to go and do a chain module replacement on the front of the engine. I'm going to leave the engine, transmission, everything in place. I'm going to drop the whole front suspension with the lower cradle. We're going to drop that and get that out of the way. Remove the oil pan, and then try to remove that chain module and replace it. I'm going to have to break that torque on that front nut and then also retighten it while in the engine here. So you guys stay tuned and follow me, and we'll see how this is done. Like you call, we've got that something's wrong with that chain module. I think that adjuster slipped and is damaged. That's what was giving us the problem with the fuel pump, as well as the little knock-in in the engine. So let's get to it. All right. First thing that I did was remove, let's get the light here, remove the plastic shields here, and over this side remove the brake duct out of there. After that we went ahead and removed the brake caliper as an assembly, disconnected all the speed sensor and the brake pad sensor, left the lines hooked up so we don't have to drain it, and then we just kind of tied it off to the top here, right here on the strut tower bolt, just kind of hang it off of there. After that we went ahead and disconnect the bolt from the top here. This is all disconnected. Also disconnected the lower strut bolt right here, so the strut's being held by the top bolts right now. So effectively, and also disconnected the stabilizer link from the strut. So effectively, this side here is ready to come down. Okay, we're going to duplicate the same thing on the other side. Okay. All right, so we've got the calipers, we've got the front suspension pretty much disconnected. Next thing that we're going to want to do is go ahead and support the top of the engine, and we went ahead and do that. You got this tow hook that screws right into the top between the head and the intake manifold. Connect that, and I've got it supported by an overhead chain hoist, but you guys can support it with like a cherry picker, an engine stand pick, or a load leveler across the fenders. Again, I don't know if that'll work on these cars, I've never used it, but like a engine hoist, you can just support it here so you can move it up and down. All right guys, so we've got the lower protective shield off, and we are attempting to disconnect the mount from the subframe. So the engine mount is bolted into the subframe. I'm just unbolting it from where it connects to the bracket. Let's see if you guys can see inside there. I can't see it, right? So we're disconnecting that bolt right there. Before we got to that bolt, we had to remove this shield that was right there. Okay. The next side here is quite a bit more difficult because you've got the power steering line, front differential, drive shaft, steering linkage. So what I'm gonna want to do here, I'm gonna unbolt the subframe completely, start to drop it down, and when I get to the point that I can access that bolt through the chassis, I'm gonna loosen it. I'll show you guys what I'm talking about, okay? Alright, so before we go ahead and start to drop the subframe down, we went ahead and disconnected the power steering bracket from the subframe right here. Okay. Also disconnect the other bracket right here from the subframe. Once we did that, you can clearly see we've got access straight up here to our steering linkage. We're going to remove this bolt and disconnect the linkage, so the subframe will come down with the rack and pinion and the linkage up to this point here. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get that disconnected, and I believe there is a wire right here that goes from the chassis to the frame and goes around the frame. Well, we're gonna go ahead and disconnect this wire right here. Okay. All right, so next thing for under the subframe, we've got to disconnect this bolt that bolts through the front radiator assembly to the subframe right here. So this is right by the oil cooler on the side here, so just gotta unscrew this bolt right there. You guys can see the bolt right there, and take that out. Then also take the one out on this side here. You can see that right there. So that's loose already. I've got that out. So that'll allow your subframe to disengage from your front radiator assembly. And then I remember I told you there was one more wire. It's right there. This is right below the suspension, and this is the power steering sensor on the rack and pinion. So make sure you disconnect that and don't try to rip that out. Okay. All right, next step. I think we're pretty close. I think that's it. I think we're ready to drop this subframe down with the engine and remove the bolts, and then we'll be able to get it down completely. Okay. All right, next we've got 6 subframe bolts, 1 in the back, 1 in the center, and 1 in the front right there. So all we got to do is loosen those bolts. Now remember, I'm supporting my engine with the subframe, the whole weight of the front of this engine with the hoist. So when I lose these bolts down, the subframe is being held together up by the engine mounts. I haven't loosened that up yet. Before I lose that, I'm going to support the subframe to drop it down. So the next thing I'm going to go ahead and do, I'm going to loosen all 6 of the subframe bolts. Already got the 2 back ones out. And then we're going to go ahead and lower it a little bit so we can remove the engine mount bolts. The troublesome one is this side that we don't have access to. You can see limited accessibility right there. Okay, so we need to drop it down so we can get access to that engine mount bolt. Okay. All 6 bolts are out. You guys can see this is loose, it's dropped. It is dropped about 1 inch or so from the top. So we're gonna let this down slowly with the hoist. See, I've got everything supported fully with my hoist right here. I just dropped it about maybe 1.5 inches. Now you guys can see we've got access to that mount bolt right there. We're going to loosen that up, but before we loosen the 2 mount bolt, we've got to support the subframe to drop it down with a jack. Okay? Before we can drop the subframe down, I had to remove the left side intercooler with the charge pipe. Got that removed, the charge pipe right there and the intercooler hose there. Had to gain access to the transmission cooler hose and power steering hoses. Power steering hoses are connected to the rack and pinion. Transmission cooler hoses is attached to the bracket assembly. So I had to disconnect it from here, also from the transmission. So first I'm going to disconnect here, then I'm going to disconnect it from the transmission side. Okay? Alright, so we're continuing to trying to get this subframe down. We have to drain the coolant because the power steering lines and the transmission cooler lines had to be disconnected from here because they're both connected to the subframe. So right now I just disconnected it and I had to lower the subframe to get to the bolt that holds onto the bracket that holds onto the line. So first things first, drain the coolant, disconnect your power steering cooler lines and your transmission cooler lines. Then after that, drop it down about a couple inches so you can get to this bolt right here. You get this bolt so you can disconnect this bolt so you can release the bracket, release the transmission cooler lines to separate it from the subframe. So that's what we're going to go do next, and I believe that's the last of it and we should be able to drop it down. Okay? Alright, we're almost there. The only thing that we have left is our power steering line from this power steering line right here. And we're going to take that off the pump. You can see right here, this torque with the power steering pump here has to come out, and the whole power steering line that goes all the way to the back will come out. Axles are staying in. We'll take those out separately. Struts stays in. So that's the only thing left, and we'll get that out, okay?